Welcome to the DHF podcast. I'm your host, Sam. I'm a DHF board member and the lead pastor of the first DHF church plant. And then I have with me today my co-host, pastor at First Christian Church of Blue Mound, Illinois, Brandon Chappell. And then I also have with me two guys that appeared on our last episode, Andrew and David from the Tent Making Christianity podcast. We had such a blast last time talking about apologetics and youth groups that we're continuing the conversation in this episode. We're going to switch gears a little bit and head into the role of apologetics in evangelism. In my mind, I think apologetics kind of breaks down into two big groups: discipleship, which you're training people on the inside for, but then there's also evangelism, where it's used. But of course, discipleship is often prepping them to go out there and do that evangelism. We talked about tactics a minute ago. How did that play a role in just like evangelizing others? How does this fit in, not just training our kids, this is true, but also how they talk to other people?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I did go through that with my youth group. Went through the video curriculum, and I had one student come up to me afterwards, and he actually attended a Christian high school. And he said, we're always told you need to go out and evangelize and you need to lead people to Christ, but no one ever tells us how to do it. And he's like, this was just such a great curriculum for giving you a roadmap and a plan just on how to evangelize at all. And I think that was kind of the power of tactics, is you don't have to have a lot of knowledge right out of the gate, right? It's learning to ask questions and really get to know the person you're talking to. And really, for me, at the core of evangelism, it's a personal endeavor. It's getting to know the person you're talking to on a genuine level, not just seeing them as this is a person I need to win, and that's the extent of your relationship, right? We're called to love people. And that's more than just trying to put a notch in our spiritual belts, right? So Francis Schaeffer, I think, once said that if he was given an hour to evangelize to someone, he's going to spend the first 55 minutes listening to what they have to say about what they think, and then spend the last 5 minutes he'll interject and ask questions or maybe respond to things. But I really think that's one of the keys, and it's one of the things that tactics does so well, is it lets the other person tell you what they think. And it's really drawing them out and understanding where they're at. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we can try to achieve in evangelism is you want to have understanding before you have agreement, right? You have to understand where that person is at in order to effectively evangelize to them.
Do you guys, when you guys do approach them and in that tactic, listen to them, does that kind of catch them off guard?
I think it does. David actually had a experience with this fairly recently. We were talking about, maybe it would be a good one to talk about.
I'm blanking on which one you're talking about, Drew.
This is the one your pastor asked you to talk to.
Oh, yeah. I had so my pastor reached out to me to kind of like set me up in a conversation with someone else who used to go to that church and was kind of going through a deconstruction phase. And I was kind of just not really sure.
No, I mean, we all know deconstruction, but if for some reason you don't, it's a fairly new term, actually. They're walking away from the faith. They're deconstructing why they believe, that kind of thing.
It's like they might not have given up Christianity entirely, but they're taking apart the ideas, kind of figuring out what they will still believe and what they don't. In this particular person's case, they were pretty much at a point of like, I don't think I'm a Christian anymore, rejecting primary tenets of it. And the pastor, who had a closer relationship to this person, kind of, I think, wanted a third party in there, someone who doesn't have that relationship already built, doesn't kind of have the stake in this, so to speak, who can kind of just talk about these things, maybe answer some questions. But essentially what I tried to do was kind of what Drew was talking about. Like, I don't know what answers you need or what are going to help. There's probably not a whole lot I can say that you haven't heard before in some ways, but I want to ask all these questions and get as clear answers as I can, and just to kind of be able to talk through them. I feel like that's been the big help for me with tactics. Is it really helps you get to the heart of the matter. Lets you kind of get past the smokescreen of things that have been maybe freaking them out, or maybe they're things that have been put forward as the primary issues when there's something more going on than that. But tactics is kind of just you ask lots of questions, and eventually you just keep kind of chipping away, digging deeper and deeper.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with the book, and I really recommend it, it starts off very often with the Columbo question, what do you mean by that? So someone makes a statement, what do you mean by that? And then, well, you're looking for these little hooks maybe or something like that. And then you're going, well, have you considered? And you're taking a little further, but that you're letting them do a lot of the talking. And then you're looking for those. Maybe they hold two ideas that are actually contradictory, and very often people do. And then you're going to go, have you considered your statement A and your statement B? How do they work together? And then you kind of let them go, oh, maybe they don't. Oh, there you go.
Doesn't always take a lot of knowledge, just takes kind of some observation and kind of like thinking through clearly what the person is saying and constantly being ready to probe a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and so for me, when I was doing small groups, and this is what we're doing at the church plant, we're going to do one chunk, and it's a very practical, focusing on learning a gospel, one of the books that are the gospels, and then then we're going to go do tactics, and then we're going to go back and we're going to learn. Hey, we're going to learn some from Acts, and then we're going to go over here and we're going to learn some from I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, or whatever, back and forth, so that they're getting those answers while they're also getting solid scriptural education. Because you do have to balance out. You don't want people trying to defend something they don't know, but we need both.
Yeah. That's actually something I think worth touching on a little bit. And that was kind of part of my personal journey too, is apologetics was new and interesting when I was a teenager. And I remember at the time, my dad was much more interested in things like, if any of you are familiar with the White Horse Inn podcast, and more along those sides of things. And I always thought that was so dry and boring to me. Like, this is not practical at all. It's stuff I feel like I already know, or if I don't know it, I don't really care to know it. I just want to know, like, what can I say to a person in a conversation that'll, win a debate, basically. And I think that was a big part of maturity, is realizing you do kind of need to know much more about what you believe if you are going to engage in a conversation like this, or at least it's a good idea to be more rock solid and not just be all in on how am I going to win a debate.
One of the things that, because I grew up in the church, my background, my testimony is I came to know Christ at 5 years old. And when I tell people that, the look on their face is like, did you really? Mm-hmm. Yes, my dad was a drug addict. He was an alcoholic. He came to know Christ when I was 5, and I saw a complete 180 in his life. And I told myself, I want what he's got. Mm-hmm. And so after he started going to church, he would take me and my brother, and I went up to the children's church pastor and I said, I want Jesus. And she just kind of was shocked by me saying that. And I was just like, this is what happened. I've seen a change in my dad, and I want what he's got. And so growing up in the church, you kind of get familiar with all the stories, all the doctrine, all the theology. And so when you start and you're sitting in a service and start to hear somebody preach on something or teach on something that you've heard a million times in your life, you just tune them out. And so you're no longer listening to them. But how did you, when it comes to apologetics, how did you overcome that and be like, you know what? I need to dig deeper in this. I need to make sure. Was it going up in, like you said, kind of debating people and realizing like, oh, maybe I don't know that? Or was it before going out and debating these people, is like, I don't know this as much as I think I do. I need to dig deeper.
I mean, for me, I was a new Christian, and so I was kind of learning this as for my own self-edification, right? I didn't know it. And for all the people like David who think that, growing up in the church is kind of a boring testimony, I am so envious of that, right? Because I feel like I missed so much time, and I'm behind the 8 ball now, and I'm constantly having to catch up to everyone who's my age because, I didn't have that foundation and all those years to kind of learn this stuff. So I was kind of drinking from a fire hose trying to get as much information as I could, right? So that in turn kind of led me into apologetics, and to talk to someone. I kind of became like David. David actually participated in speech and debate, so he has more. He's actually a qualified speech and debate person. So I just kind of have I don't want to say an argumentative nature, but I do enjoy discussing things and talking about things. And really, I had to grow a little bit spiritually and mature to not make this about winning arguments and really make it about winning people and understanding the goal here is not just to be right, but to, there's, you'll hear us saying a lot, right? You can't argue people into the kingdom, which is absolutely true. But God does seem to want us to be part of this process. If you look at the commands in Scripture, right? Go out and make disciples of all nations. Well, while we are not the ones responsible for the conversion, God does want us to be part of this process and does expect us to participate. So that was one of the major hurdles I had to come over, was kind of, checking the ego at the door. You have to resist that temptation to say, oh, I know all the answers to this, and, kind of humble yourself and put yourself back in. For me, I put myself back in the place where I was when I became a Christian, right? Didn't know a lot. Sam and I, we had a conversation before we recorded our podcast about just using the word the narthex, right? You walk into church and someone says, hey, after the benediction, let's meet in the narthex. We'll go fellowship at Perkins down there. And you have no idea what they're talking about, right? So it's a very intimidating space to come into. So it's maybe a little bit easier for me to go back and put myself in that place and slow my roll, so to speak, and really make sure that I'm treating the situation charitably.
That reminds me, I remember hearing Brett Koukl talking about, like when I'm talking to a new person, I'm not trying to teach them what apologetics is or use that word, or even in churches, sometimes I'll teach them, how to respond and not even focus on this word apologetics. Because really what it often is that somebody who doesn't know the church world, like Brandon, you grew up in church. I grew up like on and off in church. There's so much we know that they don't. And it's just answering their questions. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. We're answering those, treating them legitimately, carefully responding to them, not just going, you should know this, not looking down on them, not belittling them for getting some things wrong. And I know I've had to learn that. All right, I've read this really good academic book and it's for my personal growth, and I'm probably never going to use this again. And then also there's that random moment where up the topic comes up and, hey, pastor, somebody said this. What do I do? All right, now I'm ready. I haven't used this from this book in a long time, but here I am. It's been 2 years, but let me pull it out. That's been a helpful part of my journey, because it's not a constant, I guess, sometimes especially if you're a pastor, when you're focusing internally and you're dealing with folks that are at church, but when you're dealing with the unchurched, those that are outside, maybe they're not going to phrase it in this philosopher or this college professor all the time said this, but you're going to get those same kind of questions, and you have to have, as 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, a defense for the hope that is within you. Yet, with gentleness and meekness, you got to do that part. It can't just be that. Even as, have you considered this? It could be very different depending on your tone and your body language.
Or even what do you mean by that?
Right, yeah. Like, what do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that? Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion?
I'm curious. How are you understanding? That's very different. Yeah. Their whole body language plays into that. Some of it boils down to don't be a jerk.
Yes.
Well, that kind of leads into the next question. Andrew, you were talking about how when you're talking to somebody, you're not trying to debate to win the argument. You are debating to win souls. But have you guys ever got to a point where you kind of lost sight of that in mid debate? Like, at what point do you think, or do you find that line of, okay, now I'm debating to win the argument and not win the soul? And how do you overcome that?
I would love to sit here and say, yes, I'm holy enough that has never happened to me. Sadly, yes, you do fall into that, especially if someone's being very hostile in their comebacks. And for me, it's when I get the sense that people are being dismissive of what I'm saying or not taking it seriously. Really have to work at maintaining that that calm and not going there, so to speak. But it can be challenging, and again, you just have to keep reminding yourself, do what you're called to do, present the gospel with grace, and God will do the work. God does the heavy lifting here, right? We need to be faithful in our responses and faithful in our presentation of the gospel, and then allow the Holy Spirit to do its work. You're going to run across people who are just closed off. There's no question about that. Those are the people you just have to step back and say, okay, we're just going to pray for this person.
Mm-hmm. The apologists sometimes forget that don't cast your pearls before swine first, and want to keep going and get frustrated. Like, I've had someone tell me that I didn't know anything about various other religions, and that Buddha founded Islam and all this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, please stop. I just wanted to get so hostile. Like, you clearly don't know what you're talking about, but you want to tell me this. Like, stop. I had to cool off and be like, yeah, I'm going to pray for you. Just forgive me for losing my temper. Moving on.
Yeah. J. Warner Wallace talks a lot about picking your audience in evangelism, right? And he says there are basically four groups, and I'll use right and left here. Don't read anything into that. That's not a political statement, but on the left, you have the solid Christians who you could produce the body of Jesus, and they're still going to believe that, they're not going to be moved off of Christianity no matter what. Then you have the people on the far right who are committed atheists. There's nothing you can do or say to them that's going to change their mind. The battleground is kind of in the middle, right? You have some that kind of lean atheism, but they're willing to listen to you and they're open to arguments. And then we also have that group of Christians who are maybe questioning a little bit, and they just need some good answers to a question to keep them in the Christianity camp. So that those middle two sections are really where we want to focus our efforts. Now, we don't ignore those people on the far right who are in that atheistic camp. We just take that different tactic where to them, now we're committed to prayer for them and praying for God to change their hearts and open them up to accepting the gospel.
How would you consider, or how would you pick your audience? You said you have those two middle grounds, the Christians that are having those questions, and then the atheists that are maybe potentially questioning whether or not they believe in Christianity and God. What would your main focus be? Because you kind of want to keep those Christians, but also want to go out and get those souls and convert to Christianity.
Yeah, and I think it's a twofold. If you're trying to keep the Christians that are maybe questioning, I'd start with your local church and your home church. Work in that area. This is kind of what tent making Christianity is all about, right? David and I, we're not called pastors, but we do have a passion for doing ministry work. So we try to be a resource to our local pastors and local churches, and I think that's important. You can volunteer with your pastor's blessing. Hey, can I lead a Bible study? Can I do a tactics Bible study on a Wednesday night or whatever? Something like that, to where you're working within your church as a resource to them. And then when you decide to go outside of the church, you can focus your attention on the group over here that maybe they're the non-believers who you think are open to hearing what you have to say.
And I think you can also tell a lot from the tone, based on what they are saying. Is this a person who is kind of here to score points and crack jokes? Are they basically just here to mock you? I don't think you're probably going to get very far in that conversation. You might be able to make a point to a third party. Like if there's an audience seeing your conversation, you're probably not going to win that person, but there might still be value in that conversation. But if this is someone who is asking big questions. Like they seem genuinely interested in the conversation, even if their heart doesn't seem to be moving right now. I think there is value always in those conversations. The hard part is when is this an in-person relationship or is this text online? There's way more of the former conversations if you're in any kind of text online context.
I try to avoid those online discussions, whether it be with people in my congregation or not, because as a pastor, you can say everything right and have the right intention, but you don't know what they're dealing with at the moment and or what attitude that they have, and they're going to read that attitude into your text. So that's good advice, not getting into those online discussions like that.
I used to think that the online social media platforms were a wonderful opportunity to have a marketplace of ideas where people actually engaged and went back and forth and really listened to each other. It's not. It is a loony bin with people screaming their own thoughts at the top of their lungs, right? It's more about getting it out there than it is receiving anything.
Build your own echo chamber.
Right. Yeah. It's the echo chamber. And we're all guilty of that to some degree, I think. But communicating with others is a both and. You got to be a part of local believers, that you're building believers up, and you got to actually encounter lost people. A lot of times it's hard for us when we're very busy inside of a church to actually have that other opportunity to go out there, karate class, going to the gym, your kids' soccer games, whatever, encounter people who aren't in the church, strike up conversations and look for those clues or those hooks that you can then bring in some of those. Now, you said this. What did you mean by that? Did you know that? And all those kinds of things. Keep talking. And then you can get to the gospel. Andrew and David, I want you to plug where folks can find out more and just follow along with your work at the Tent Making Christianity podcast.
Sure. So we are normally at tentmakingchristianity.com. We are currently upgrading our website a little bit. So maybe another week or two before that's back online. And I'm discovering there may be a lot of work here re-uploading some of our content and stuff. But the Tent Making Christianity podcast, we're on all the major podcasting sites, the Apple, Google, we're on all of them. So Spotify. Yep. Thank you, David. David's good. He's the young guy, so he keeps me up on all the techie stuff. So
more like I use Spotify, so I needed to make sure we were on Spotify.
Awesome. Well, your social media handle on Facebook is?
We are Tent Making Christianity on Facebook. So
that's the one I was looking for. And you guys have a Facebook group as well.
We do. Yes.
So I can put those, or I can have our friend Fred put those in the show notes. And that way you can just click, whether you're listening to the DHF podcast on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, any of those things, you can just click in the show notes and see that. This has been this particular episode of the Disciple Heritage Fellowship podcast, or the DHF podcast. You can find out more about our ministry at discipleheritage.org. If you enjoyed this, we'd love it if you would like, comment if you're on YouTube, and of course, share with your friends, and we'll catch you on the next one.